It's noon in Europe. It's, I guess, 6 p.m.-ish in Asia. So no matter where you are, guys, it's time to eat or to have a drink. So thank you. Thanks a million for being here with us to attend this webinar, this masterclass. And I promise you will not be disappointed. So today we're together to answer a key question that keeps coming back from the brands we work with. And here is the pitch. And I guess most of you will relate to it. So you run a brand that's strong and that has been around for a while. You have very strong R&D, very strong science, very strong R&D background, yet you're being outperformed by the newcomer that has much less to say than you, but that performs better in terms of hyper success. Why? Why does this keep coming back? Well, this is the key topic we'll be answering today. And I will not be able to do that, of course. So who are we? Well, first of all, let's introduce ourselves. We are Zorba, and Zorba is a science and innovation storytelling group. We are infused by science because we love talking about science, moved by art because what we aim to do is making science as beautiful as possible, and we are powered by tech because tech enables us to create meaningful, impactful stories and experiences. And our job is basically to help you and help your brand science make the difference by sharing it with precision, but emotion and impact. And to do so, we blend a unique mix of talents from scientists to creators to geeks, all together working to make your science as powerful as possible. And I'm very happy to be with some of them today because I'm not alone to answer today's topics. And I'm introducing first Pierre de Gouzet.
Hello, everyone.
Hi, Pierre. So Pierre is the head of our Life Science Strategy Department. And Pierre is also with Jeanne-Henri. Hi, everyone. Hi, Jeanne. Jeanne is a senior life science global creative strategist. And together, they're going to unpack the key question we want to answer to today. And by the way, hello, guys. I am Anne-Sophie Viau, and I'm CEO and partner at Zorba. And I will be your master of ceremony today. So last thing before we dive into the topic, we want this session to be interactive. I mean, as interactive as possible, because this is not a lecture. The objective is not to have this top down. So we want you guys from the audience to ask questions first. So as you can see with the red arrow on the screen, there is a question section at the bottom right of the screen. You can go there, type in your questions, and we will take some time to answer on the way, or at the end of the session if we don't have time during the session. And there is another section that is called the poll section. I will be submitting some polls during also this session, and I would love to have you guys answering because this is a good way for us to understand who we are with and how you can, guide us and help us adapt the content better to your needs and your key questions. Here is the agenda of today. I'm not going to go into many details because I guess you've heard enough of me for now. But we're going to open the session with frustrations that we get from the industry and from clients. And these frustrations come from you, and Pierre is going to share them. Mm-hmm. And then we're going to go through the 5 mistakes you guys probably do if you feel one of these frustrations, and of course, how to avoid them. And at the end, we will reserve some time for a Q&A moment so that you guys can, ask all your questions, and we will take some time to go through them. So I'm done for now. I'm leaving the mic to Pierre that is going to open with frustrations.
Well, thank you very much, Anne-Sophie, for introducing the topic. And also, thanks everyone again for joining us. I really appreciate you all to be here today. Before indeed we jump into examples and everything, we'd like to start with something much more familiar. We'd like to start actually with you, our audience, because Zorba has been existing for like 20 years around of existence, something like that. And so we've worked with hundreds of science-driven brands, different industries, different markets, and different challenges, of course. But despite all of these differences, we kind of keep hearing the same frustrations a bit over and over again. And so this is what we want to talk about first. We have three different frustrations that we encounter a lot at Zorba. The first one is actually a very, very common one, especially coming from research and development teams. It's we already have a strong scientific story, so why are we weakening it by chasing trendy words? Um, the fact is, like, brands have spent years building scientific expertise, only to consider abandoning it because a new buzzword has become like fashionable. The latest example that comes to my mind is longevity. Like, everyone doesn't want to talk about anti-aging anymore. It's all about longevity, and we've been doing longevity since the beginning, etc., etc. And so all of a sudden, everyone wants to be a longevity brand. So the question is, do you feel like you're really creating differentiation when you do that? Or are you perhaps slowly erasing your brand DNA? So this is kind of like our opening frustration. Second one that we also want to present to you, it's also basically what drove us to do this webinar. How are brands with lighter science managing to sound more convincing than brand like us, especially bigger companies that are backed by years and years of research? Because imagine spending years developing proprietary science only to see like a digital native competitor, for example, with not even a fraction of your research, of your science, feel more desirable in the eye of consumers. That can be very frustrating, and this is something that we hear a lot as well. And we feel like, it's a question maybe whether scientific excellence is enough anymore in the eyes of consumers, and this is what we want to talk about today. And finally, we have a third frustration that we also hear a lot during our calls and our meetings with all of you. There is incredible research behind what we create, but from the outside, nobody sees it. And I believe this is the frustration that we actually, I mean, in my opinion, we hear the most here at Zorba. Every time we discuss with a company, with a brand, they always tell us we have years of clinical studies, we have this amount of experiments, this amount of data, I don't know, thousands or hundreds of scientists behind our product, our technologies. But for consumers, it's just another, I don't know, skincare cream, for example, that they have in their hands. And they don't see all the potential, all of the science that comes with it. So these are kind of like the three main frustrations that drove us to actually create this webinar for you to at least try to partially answer them with the pain points basically that we've seen. I believe Anne-Sophie want to maybe submit a little poll. We would like to have your opinion on that. Do you feel that all of these three frustrations, is this something that you encounter a lot as well on your side? Maybe are you, feeling something else, another frustration that we haven't listed here? So yeah, we'd like to have your opinion on that as well.
Yes, I've just published a poll in the poll section, and you can see it's really easy. You just need to click and let us know which of these frustrations resonate with you.
So we'll let you a few seconds maybe to answer that, but as a sort of like conclusion to that, when we listed these frustrations, there was kind of like some sort of paradox that we saw was kind of like going on here. Because just because you have better science doesn't automatically mean that your brand is better in the eyes of, again, consumers. We're not talking healthcare professionals here, but really, really consumers. Because if it did, like the companies investing the most in R&D would automatically win on the market. And that's not 100% what we observe, right? We see brands, and especially the digital native ones, with less science, less heritage, fewer science, fewer studies, becoming the reference. So clearly something is happening. And so we've come to realize that the problem you encounter today is very rarely your science itself, because of course you have a lot, but it's basically what makes the difference is how much actually value you create from your very own science. And when I say that, it's of course apart from the whole ecosystem and digital nature, again, of the winning brands. Because in our opinion, at Zorba, from what we've seen again with our expertise, the brands winning the game are usually much more focused, much more consistent about what they do. They also know how to be more visible and accessible on all touch points, on all media, because this is basically where they were born. And so as a bigger company, this can be a lot more harder to achieve, actually. So for you to avoid these frustrations that we've listed in the beginning, we have identified the main pain points, again, that could hold you back. And this is what Jen is going to present to you right now.
Yes, thank you very much, Pierre. So yes, indeed, now that we have seen the frustrations and the paradox, let's move on into the 5 mistakes that you probably do. And I'm saying probably because most of the time, these mistakes are not intentional. Brands don't decide to make their science less powerful, but in the way science is structured, translated, and activated, some reflexes can slowly weaken its impact. So the goal here is not to point fingers, of course, but it's to identify the most common patterns that prevent strong science from becoming strong brand value.
Yeah, and just maybe to complete on that, again, the idea was not to give you like a specific framework or a cheat sheet on some sort, something like that, and be like, hey, you should be, starting doing this and this or that, like these types of brands, because it's not going to work for you, because you're probably a bigger company than those. And so trying to replicate what these brands do could be a pitfall for you. So instead, it's kind of like, let's learn from your mistakes directly.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. Before we dive into the mistakes, I would just like to share very quickly a flash insight we got from the audience, because I think it's really relevant. We have Berak, who's sharing with us the issue she's facing from Biosdorf side, because she's saying that she experiences this with her own patented active ingredient, which is the thiamidol. Thiamidol has a lot of research, a lot of science, is the most effective active for dark spots, yet the awareness is 7% globally for the ingredient. So that is a very, very relevant insight, exactly the topic we're diving in today. So hopefully, Berak, the 5 mistakes that you might be doing and how to address them could be a way, at least the first step to see how we can solve this issue.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
So yeah, if better science does not automatically create better brands, then the question becomes what actually prevents science from creating value. And very often, it's not about the quality of the science itself. It's about how this science is owned, how it's expressed, how it's activated by the brand. So we have identified 5 mistakes to avoid. So first, chasing trends instead of owning your science. Second, treating science as pure R&D instead of making it a shared brand language. And third, being scared of the past, as if innovation could only come from the future. Fourth, explaining science instead of popularizing it. And finally, not thinking broad enough, meaning treating science as a single communication moment instead of building a richer science ecosystem. So as you can see here, the issue is not the science quality, it's more about the science value creation. So let's start with the first mistake, which is chasing trends instead of owning your science. And this is probably one of the most common reflexes today, especially in science-driven categories. And I think that you have already realized, and Pierre told this at the beginning, but every few months, a new topic becomes the one everyone wants to talk about. And suddenly every brand wants to be part of this conversation. But the risk is to believe that differentiation always comes from what's new, when actually the most distinctive thing about your brand may already exist. So longevity, epigenetics, microbiome, or whatever comes next, these topics can be powerful, of course. But the problem starts when brands jump on the buzzwords only because they sound trendy or because everyone else is talking about them. Because when you do that, you risk making your science look interchangeable. And you may have something unique already, but instead of making it stronger, you dilute it into the same vocabulary as everyone else. So the point is not to ignore the trends, of course. The point is to stop letting trends define your scientific identity. So instead of relying on short-term hype, the strongest brands go for the long run. They stay true to their DNA and they build from their science instead of constantly reinventing it. And LPG is a very good example of this. Here, the brand never shied away from its very first scientific territory, which is entomology. So they could have tried to move away from it or to repackage their innovation under a completely different trend-led vocabulary, but they did the opposite actually. And more precisely, a couple years ago, for a new launch, they modernized this existing concept by calling it augmented entomology. And that is what makes this example very interesting. They didn't spend time chasing trends just to sound more modern or more innovative. They went back to what was already ownable in their brand DNA, and they managed to elevate it. So sometimes the strong scientific stories is not the newest ones. It's the one only your brand can credibly tell.
Yeah, I will also add that maybe instead of asking yourself, what's trending today, maybe you should ask yourself first, what have we been uniquely good at for years? And then once you kind of like coin that, you can always modernize it, amplify that specific expertise. But the idea is always to kind of like mine your science instead of constantly reinventing it.
Yeah.
Because you're going to be trapped in sort of like short-term storytelling loop that is going to be very difficult to get out of.
So if I summarize what you guys were saying, the idea is not to keep the trends aside. Of course, we don't want to be left behind and forget about what's hot at the moment. But the idea is more, instead of jumping on a trend, look at your science, what you have, and consider how you can connect what you have with the trend that is going at the moment. This should not be the other way around, basically.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so that's why you have brands, for example. I talked about longevity earlier because I think this is kind of like the most
Trendy.
the hottest topic of the moment. And you have brands that even haven't been like necessarily good at anti-aging or in that specific segment, but all of a sudden, since everyone is talking about longevity, they need to kind of like jump on that train again and be part of the group. Instead of again saying, oh, we have been doing anti-aging and or even health aging or whatever since years and years and years, and we already have all the data around that. So maybe it's kind of like just a turnaround, like a twist to that, to be able to talk about longevity and not just for it to come like as a global surprise for everyone.
Yeah, totally. All right, let's move on to the second mistake, which is treating science as just an R&D topic. And this is a very common one because, of course, science always starts in the lab. But that doesn't mean that it should stay there. Your science is too valuable to stay trapped in the lab. It should become something the whole brand can understand, own, or express. So in many companies, science follows this very linear path. R&D develops the innovation, then the marketing translates it, then the regulatory validates it, and finally, creative teams execute it. So each department has a role, of course, but the risk is that nobody truly owns the science as a whole. The story becomes kind of fragmented. But at every step, it can lose clarity, strength, and consistency because the strongest scientific stories are rarely built by one department only. So winning brands work together as a team. They speak about their science with a united voice. And this is when science becomes more than a proof point. It becomes a shared brand language.
And maybe if you can come back, Jeanne, on the chart here, because I think this point clicks very well with the insight we got from Berak. This kind of linear way of building things is very common when it comes to ingredients. So that's why I'm referring to Thiamidol. Whereas this square matrix creates much more powerful stories when it comes to storytelling an ingredient and making sure it really stands out. And I mean, good news, this is what we do at Zorba, basically creating this square matrix and making sure people sit down together to build the story together. But yet, maybe mistake number 2 is a good starting point when it comes to the insight you shared with us there.
Yeah, and it can create a lot of frustrations as well, I feel like, because sometimes it's more like, oh, R&D creates science, and then marketing creates stories that kind of like dilute the main message, the core science, and then it's approved, and then it's produced, etc., etc. But if we like still work in silo, I feel like this is where the value of the science itself is kind of like lost in translation. And so that's why having like one global team made of a lot of different, people from different horizons will always be better than just, everyone sitting in that corner and just adding their little stone to it.
Yeah, this is how you create value, because when you remain in a linear mode, what happens most of the time is that value is actually cut at every step. So R&D people feel that marketing is cutting the value of what they've done. Marketing feels that regulatory is cutting the value of what they've built, and then the creative teams at work reinterpret what they have, and then all the other departments feel that the value is once again kind of changed or modified. That's why the second path is much more powerful when it comes to actually creating value together.
Yeah. So Dyson actually is a very strong example of this mindset. What is interesting is that the brand does not hide its science behind the final product. They open their lab. They show how innovation is tested, how it was challenged, how it was engineered, refined. We see the prototypes, we see the testing protocols. We also have internal expert interviews, and we see all the reasoning behind the product design. So R&D is not treated as a backstage function. It becomes part of the consumer-facing brand experience, and that is very powerful because it makes the innovation process visible but also desirable. So the lesson here is not that every brand should communicate exactly like Dyson. They have their own DNA, their own way to communicate about their science. But the lesson is that science becomes stronger when it is shared, when it's embodied and owned across the whole brand. So the third mistake is believing innovation only comes from the future. And this is a very natural reflex. In science-driven categories, we always want to know what's next. We always want to know what's new, what should be the next breakthrough, etc. But sometimes by looking too much at what hasn't been discovered yet, we forget to look at what we already have. And very often, your next breakthrough may already exist in your archives. So indeed, and I'm waiting for the slide to, oh, yeah, sorry.
A little technical issue.
Okay, so yes, indeed, brands often have a strong bias towards novelty, as if innovation only existed in what is new, recent, or never seen before. And of course, innovation matters, but science does not age the same way marketing does. A study, an ingredient, or a technology, or even a historical expertise can become highly relevant again, simply because consumers' expectations have changed. And something that felt too technical a few years ago may now feel perfectly aligned with today's needs for efficacy, for transparency, or long-term skin health. So the idea is not to stay stuck in the past, of course not. It is to dive into what your science already has and ask, how can this become relevant again today? And this is what we call retro innovation.
Yeah, I really like that idea of science doesn't age the same way marketing does, because like a campaign gets old after some time. A visual identity will evolve as well, inevitably. But a clinical study, for example, that has been done even 10 years ago, or like a biological mechanism happening within the skin or the gut or whatever, will always kind of like remain true, unless we discover something even like newer to it. And so having that idea of you always have kind of like existing data that could be forgotten, but still has and holds a lot of value for you, it's definitely a crucial here, because it will allow you to kind of like restart the conversation over something, but basically with a new angle to it, and basically make it almost as brand new as possible when it's something that happened even like a few years ago.
So if I summarize, it's creating newness with, let's say, old data.
Yeah, or at least like existing materials.
So sustainable in a way, And it makes me actually think that it's also a good way to connect with the first item we shared, which is don't chase trends when you don't necessarily need to, because looking at what you already have is also a way to build consistency over time, and therefore, building your uniqueness stronger.
Yeah.
Reuse and recycle.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. Science doesn't age. It stays always the same.
And we have a good example to share here.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, because La Roche-Posay is a very, very good example of this logic. So the brand starts from a millenary thermal water known for its beneficial action on sensitive and damaged skin. So here, the science foundation was already there. The medical credibility was there. The prescription level was there. But at the same time, there was relatively low new news or scientific hype around it.
Yeah,
So the
thermal
question-
water is water.
Yeah,
So-
what is so the question is, how do you take something deeply credible but already well established and make it feel relevant again today? And this is where La Roche-Posay moved from a historical scientific foundation to a renewed scientific territory, which is skin microbiome science. So the thermal water remains central. It still acts as the spine of their territory, but it is now backed by numerous clinical evidence, either new or revamped. So instead of abandoning its heritage to chase a completely new topic, the brand reactivated what it already owned through a much more contemporary scientific lens. And this is exactly this idea of retro innovation that we were talking about just now.
So basically what they did, thermal water is the foundation of the brand.
Mm-hmm.
They kept it as a foundation of the brand and didn't change that. But they looked at specific properties of the water, maybe in studies they already had, maybe in new studies they triggered, and they actually built this skin microbiome territory based on the action of the thermal water on the microbiome. So I think it's really a good example of revamping, complete revamping of something that is millenary. So also, let's say it's, with straightforward words, a bit old-fashioned, because I think thermalism in a way doesn't sound like the most sexy territory. They didn't push that aside, but they built on this to make it, up to date, trendy, and
they revamp, but they also managed to elevate it. So it's a better science now. And now I will let Pierre present the next mistakes.
Yes.
Just before you go into that, we do not have that many questions. So please don't be shy. The question section is open. Just go for it and ask your questions, and we can pose. We have some time for that to go through your question and to answer. But we have a question right now, so I'm probably going to take it now. We have a question from Berak. Is there any net sales market share increases as a business result of this? Of course, you cannot share, but we need to see business impact as brand holders. Totally makes sense. I mean, of course. So yeah, we cannot share numbers, and to be very honest, we don't have all of them. I mean, they belong to the brand. What we can share, because we know that, and that's the example of La Roche-Posay. So I don't know if any people from La Roche-Posay are in the audience. If they are, they can totally share what they want. But what we know is that this move from thermalism, I would say, to microbiome science, what it helped generate is more relevancy and more business impact in categories that were not historically dermatologically prescribed. To summarize, body care at La Roche-Posay is an old prescription business model. Thermal water, very known by dermatologists. So I would say body care is maybe not the category where this move made the biggest difference. Face care, however, was not as strong as body care in the past. And this move to a more technical, scientifically edgy territory drove visibility and impact on the face care business. So this was a move that this scientific territory building enabled. Acne, anti-aging, these categories that were not the historically strongest for the brand, that was more on body care.
And even more like medical aspects of it and skin conditions that like eczema, psoriasis, like everyone, like everything basically could be linked to that specific territory as well.
Yeah.
I will also add that it kind of like became as well the blueprint in the industry of the thermal water brands, because once La Roche-Posay actually did that, most of the thermal water brands as well try to build on that, integrate that as well. Avon then started to talk about the microbiome as well. Everyone, like every brands like those, try to kind of like refresh their images as well. Saint-Gervais-Mont-Blanc, for example,
it's
you know, a
true.
lot of other brands like that try to imitate, or not imitate in the sense of doing the same thing, but again, taking that kind of like blueprint of what La Roche-Posay did of refreshing their image and trying to build more science out of it, and did that.
Yeah, it actually made the category move. Thermal brands being more body care prescription brands. I mean, the creation of the scientific territory really shifted the position, enlarged the, I would say, the purchase basket. More categories to embrace, more potential into more technical categories like face care. And it's true that the entire thermal brand category wanted to follow. So they really set a trend there.
Absolutely. All right, on to mistake number 4. Second to last mistake, explaining science instead of translating it. Or in other words, scientific truth doesn't automatically create understanding. Now, don't get me wrong, it doesn't mean that you shouldn't say the truth at all, but you need to adapt your messaging to your audience. And you might think, well, this is obvious, like everybody knows that. And I think you actually would be surprised at how many brands don't actually do it very well or actually get it wrong. Like they assume that because the science is strong, then the communication will naturally be strong too. And they cannot be more wrong than that. And so they start explaining modes of action, and they throw some specific wordings or like terminology into it, and more details and more this and more that, etc., etc. What you need to understand from it is that consumers do not experience science the same way you do, especially if you're a scientist from an R&D team, for example. And then you also have the opposite, which is usually observed in marketing team, where it's just kind of like over diluted messages that barely have any science in them, or it's kind of like just touches of science very superficially. And so you really need to find that, I know it's difficult, but that very sweet spot between the two. And to do that, the best, at least I think, is really to consult each other. And I think it's kind of like tying back to mistake number 2, I believe. Don't let the science kind of like get lost in translation because it travels from one department to another. Again, it should not be like confined into a lab or just between the hands of one department, one team only. It's that idea of co-building stories, campaigns, things like scientific platform together. And if you do, you will be in a much better place when it comes to communicating science. One example that stood out in
Brushing
our eyes
and flossing matter
is
for good
Listerine.
oral health.
This was actually a campaign
But for many
made
people,
for
that
both
can be hard to
consumers and
achieve
healthcare
daily.
professionals,
We
actually
asked
using the same
ourselves,
clinical
how
study
can
for
Listerine
both
help?
assets. And
In
we
new
really like that
groundbreaking
aspect
clinical
of,
studies,
adapting the
scientists put
messaging and the
Listerine to the
content
ultimate
depending on the
test.
audience,
With
without
over
ever
350
losing the
participants
science.
enrolled, every one
Okay,
of
so
them got a
sure,
professional dental
the
team to
B2B
start off
film
with.
is going to feature more details
In
from the
one
other
of the
one,
studies,
but
people
we
were
still talk
divided into
about like
groups.
germs and
One group
bacteria,
that
and we
brushed and
don't shy away
flossed
from
twice daily under professional supervision.
We have
Another
clinical
group that
study.
brushed
We
and
have this one
flossed
from the video,
daily
so if you
by a
can-
dental hygienist, and a group that brushed.
We're going to cut the sound of the
Brushing
video.
and flossing
Let us know if
matter
it's,
for good.
muted for now.
Brushing and
I'm just going
flossing
to
matter for
resume my
good
last
oral
sentence.
health. But for many people, that can be hard to achieve daily.
Are we good now?
We asked ourselves, brushing and flossing matter.
We're going to reset that. Sorry, guys.
We're gonna simply cut the audio. In any case, I think we will be able to send you the link directly to the video, so you will be able to hear them as well on your side, either like after the webinar or in a few days. Doesn't matter when. But basically, maybe to resume on what I was saying, the idea is that from one single like common clinical study, we still can get like different assets talking about the same things, but in a different way, in a different angle, depending on the audience. And that's really kind of like the core of what we want to convey here through this mistake. And so I was saying that, of course, the B2B film is going to have more details than the other one, than the B2C one, but we will still talk about bacteria and germs and the oral microbiome and everything of that sort. And just because it sounds a bit icky, and usually it's kind of like for healthcare professionals, that kind of topic, we don't really shy away from it. So definitely, a good example on how to use one main study and kind of like twist it, angle it to adapt its messages to the audience. If I had to summarize, kind of like same science, different languages.
And just one thing I wanted to build up on here.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes we're frightened to share with non-expert audiences science that looks a bit tough. We should not be scared, because sometimes tough science is exactly what they need. So it's more a matter of how you share it, how you accompany the audience into your science. But the risk is either to oversimplify or to overcomplexify.
Yeah, absolutely.
You really
hardcore science.
You really need to find your soft spot, because on certain topics, consumers are willing for a lot of information. And if you have that information to provide, do not hide it if you're scared it might be too complicated. It's just a matter of how you actually share it.
And I want maybe to bounce on Youngjo message. We want to deliver right and scientific messages, but usually regulations make messages to be diluted. I know. And it's usually that, reg is kind of like the bad cop of the story, which is why, again, tying back to kind of like our little schematic from mistake number 2, if we get everyone kind of like in the same room right from the very beginning of our scientific storytelling or even platform or messaging, whatever process, it will be much more easier than just having regulatory at the end of the process and kind of like act as the knife that will butcher everything that we've put on so far, if you know what I mean. So definitely, let's try to, and you should definitely try it, have everyone really working all together just to make sure you don't encounter that sort of like issue as well on your end.
Yes, and another trick maybe we can share is that everybody can deliver a scientific message. Doesn't necessarily need to be delivered in one single way. And sometimes, I mean, of course, you need to work with regulation, but sometimes changing the speaker or sharing the science via someone else might be a way to share it with more details and be regulatory compliant. I'm just giving you an example. I mean, the medical industry is very, very tough because the regulatory is super high. It's very complicated to express the science and give, like kind of backstage information and how a medicine works or anything. One thing that works, though, is to have the patient, carrying the message and coming with testimonies, information, whatever that can back your science and prove your product is working and your product is strong. But it's another voice that shares the message. And sometimes it's also a way to, find your soft spot where you can deliver what you need to deliver and be okay with regulation. Of course, it's not a one-size-fits-all. It needs to be worked in a tailor-made way, but it's also a creative way to go through regulation.
Yeah, absolutely. Finally, last mistake, number 5, and that one is definitely a big one too. Treating science as a single communication moment. And this one, I think is probably my kind of like most hated mistake because, I'm a scientist, I'm a pharmacist. And so having brands kind of like reducing their science to just a campaign, a one-shot moment, when it needs to be part of a constant conversation is kind of like heartbreaking, if I can say so. So yeah, historically, science was communicated when there was something new to announce, and it kind of like still is to this day by a lot of brands. There is a product launch, a new ingredient, a new clinical study, like whatever, and brands then would just create a campaign around it and move on to the next launch or to the next event. But making your science actually, episodic, very like that, in, only a single points in time, is actually the I guess the biggest mistake that you could make of all of them. Because today's audiences, they discover your science through a constant stream of interactions. It should be kind of like a one continuous brand experience. People, I don't think that they meet a brand once a year. Like they see it on Instagram, on YouTube, in pharmacies, whatever touch points you have, even in print, like in magazines. They experience ecosystems. And so that's why your science need to be part of it. And there's tons of ways to do it. We've put that slide here to also show you, instead of just, I don't know, one beautiful main movie that you're going to use for a few weeks, and then it will kind of like be sitting on your YouTube channel or whatever, and nobody will kind of like touch it ever again. There is so many other stuff that you can actually do, so much more content actually showcasing, featuring your science. And when I say your science, it's again, not like mode of action, it can also be, the people behind it. We've talked about it in our previous webinars, but basically what is going on, what is behind the scenes of your science. This is something that you can show as well to make sure that people kind of like connect with your science and remember it. And this is where you will gain a lot of impact, a lot of traction on the market.
So if I summarize what you're saying, Pierre, basically the mistake we see very commonly is that, let's take the example of an ingredient, because this is also the insight that was shared with us. The ingredient is communicated in hero assets. I don't know, TVC, digital hero movie, key visuals, like, some of the key assets. But what you're saying is that science should be a conversation, and a conversation that should be going always on, because
Absolutely.
consumers are always connected with your brand, especially on social media. So that's why your science should be distilled in a lot of different content, a lot of different conversations, just to make sure that the awareness reaches the point you want it to reach.
Yeah.
So the list here is not exhaustive, of course, but it gives you an idea of the extent of the amount of content you need to consider if you want your science to land. And of course, everything doesn't need to be like a superhero production that is like super expensive to do. It can be smart and done in a way that is very tactical. But creating this conversation is also part of the recipe for success. And why do newcomers, new brands, new digital native brands achieve better success with their science that is maybe not as strong as yours? It's probably because they're more used to this ecosystem and to creating these ongoing conversations. Because this is their model, and this is the model that we're born with.
Yeah,
so that's
absolutely.
also one of the key points. Interesting.
I see a few questions in the chat that actually kind of linked. Yeah, kind of the same. Can we talk about science on social? What do you think about talking about science on social media? What tone and voice should we use for the audience? So absolutely, and I think we should almost treat social kind of like sort of like endpoints basically, and everything that comes before needs to be again part of the conversation. Science, like social media, is definitely the place to show science, because your audience again are hyper connected. They live social, they breathe social, they eat social, and so that's why if your science is not part of it, you're missing a big key, a big piece of the puzzle here. So definitely this is something to do. Of course, with the right manner to do it. Again, when you talk about tone and voice, could a funny angle work versus other ways, it still needs to be true to your brand DNA. You can still do something a bit kind of like unexpected that kind of like can catch people's attention, but do not go into the first mistake of chasing trends just because you saw some, I don't know, internet memes or whatever, and you want to do it again. It might not land very well. And so always kind of like be true to yourself and make sure you always respect, what your science is and what your brand is in the end.
Yeah, and you should also adapt your tone of voice to the different kind of social media. Something that will work very well on Instagram won't work very well on TikTok. So this is something you also need to adapt and to do. But of course, science on social media is necessary, I would say.
Yeah. I mean, this is the place where everything happens.
Yeah.
And if you missed it, we actually ran a science on social media masterclass a few months ago, It's available online, and I'm going to share the link with you
Mhm.
because then, of course, a lot of answers are also part of this. But yes, social media definitely. And Charles was asking, could a funny angle work versus other ways? I would say, you said it, everything can work. It just needs to be true to your brand, true to your science, and interesting. And interest doesn't necessarily come from funniness. Interest comes from the angle you choose to tell the story.
Mhm.
We also have two questions,
Yes.
one from Rebecca, another one from Natalie. So Rebecca is asking, where would you recommend starting as experts if you see a brand with strong science but with no efficient, appropriate communication? What would be the starting point?
Well, first of all, why is it not working? Why is it not efficient? And I think having a sort of like not audit, but like a realization of actually what is wrong and what are we doing wrong? What kind of mistakes are we actually doing that prevent us from, being strong on our communication, scientific communication, would be definitely the step one for me. And then from that, once you realize what is kind of like wrong or like derailed at some point in the process, because it not might be at the very beginning of the process, it might be at the end too. This is where you will be able to kind of like spot it and say, okay, this is what we need to improve on. And this is where, again, we're going to involve everyone. Everyone should be part of the conversation. This is kind of like a collective topic, of course, within your company. And so from that on, we can definitely help to, moderate and make sure that this type of mistakes cannot, or at least minimally be done again, to prevent you from reaching kind of like max impact on having a strong scientific communication. That would be kind of like my starting point for me. I don't know, Jeanne, if you have another point of view or if it's the same.
I think it's also very important to go and talk to your scientists internally and to really understand what is your DNA and what inspire them. And from this start, you can also build, okay, I know that my science has this personality, so I'm going to emphasize this personality on social media, in content. So it's very important, as Pierre said, to collaborate and talk and discuss and with your R&D teams so that everyone is around the table. And from that, you can develop a strong scientific story. And of course, it's also very important to go and see what other competitors do on the market. Why their science is so good, why it sells more, what do they do, what kind of content they do, and just do an internal audit and an external audit to have an overview of what is happening right now in terms of scientific storytelling, and then you can find the opportunity to create your story.
Yeah, maybe to find spots where you can actually kind of like insert yourself, but also to get inspired and get that you could potentially not necessarily 100% replicate, but at least, get some inspiration to also get to move on your side as well.
And it doesn't have to be in your category. You can also category. I don't know, if you're a cosmetic brand, you can go and see what is going on in the tech category and say, okay, I like what Dyson is doing at the moment, but maybe we can inspire ourselves and create a strong scientific storytelling based on that.
But R&D remains the starting point.
Of
That's
course.
what you're saying.
Yeah.
Always start with the R&D, your R&D people, because this is what we do at Zorba. Every time we have a new mission, we start with talking to R&D people. And maybe an insight we can share is that R&D people are often the most creative people in the company. Maybe this is something that is not common in the popular culture, but there is a lot of creative power from R&D. So that's why making it the starting point is, first of all, relevant, because this is where your science happens, but also very inspiring.
And they also love to talk about their science because they're very inspired by their science and very proud of what they're doing every day. So they're so happy.
And we love to do that. We also have a question from Natalie. How to manage different target groups with different tone of voice needed, consumers versus shareholders, blah, blah. So maybe I can start with an insight, and then I'm going to let you get on that. You don't necessarily need to change your tone of voice. The scientific message is the same, no matter who you're talking to. So that should be your starting point. And then the question you should be asking yourself is in this scientific message, what is going to be interesting for this audience, and for this audience, what is going to be interesting. So it's more a matter of selecting the facts that make sense for the audience you're talking to, rather than trying to change the tone of voice or the style, because tone of voice and style should be consistent with your brand and who your brand is. So to me, it's more a matter of selecting the messages you're gonna take them to. Don't know if you agree with this.
Yeah, absolutely. And so Natalie Precise, she meant consumer versus scientist. And I think you said, I think it's kind of like the same anyway. And I like what you said earlier as well. Having someone different, for example, an external KOL or someone, of that sort, to also kind of like take over your science and speak about it with a different tone of voice that is theirs, still different from yours, but still speaking about the same topic, the same science. And I think this is also an interesting way to actually do it. I see other questions.
Yes.
Maybe time is a bit ticking. We have around 6 minutes left. I can just finish this mistakes with the last batch of examples that we have.
And then we're going to try
Very quickly, and then we'll try to answer the rest. We just have 2 examples here because, again, when we talk about ecosystems and everything, we can put a lot of them here. The first one is a brand that is known as Pavis. It's a skincare brand. And what they did is building a complete set of expert-led formats and content, from educational podcasts to webinars, social carousel, that translate like really, really clinical results into very visual takeaways. Like even, things featuring like fluorescence cells, et cetera, it's actually their brand, their signature, and they do not hesitate to do that, which is really, really interesting. Another example that I really like is also the Neutrogena film, because I think Neutrogena in that case really dared to do things a bit differently when it comes to others' expertise in photobiology. It's the In the Sun movie, which basically follows, families being confronted to sun exposure and skin cancer. And I think personally it's a very interesting angle because it talks about photobiology, but with a very emotional angle that you do not actually see every day, or at least that is done in a very interesting, in a very endearing way as well. So these were,
everywhere.
Absolutely. So
put your science everywhere.
A very few examples just to illustrate that, but yeah, science can be everywhere very well.
Flood the world with your science. Interesting. Okay.
So yeah.
Are we done?
Absolutely.
I think we have a little summary slide that I am supposed to go through. Is that coming? Oh yeah, it is.
It is. It is
so
coming.
As a conclusion, the 5 mistakes that we most commonly see and that we can help you sort out. First, chasing trends. You don't necessarily to chase them. Or if you are to chase them, make sure that you connect them with your science and what belongs to you and what existed before the trend occurred. Second, science as pure R&D. Please take science out of the lab. This is not where it should stay because everybody wants to hear about what you have to say. So science is everybody's matter and should be, collectively built together. Being scared of the past. No, past is not a big word. You actually have in your past, most probably you have jewels that are just waiting to be taken out. So just go for them, and they're going to help you be more consistent over time. Explaining, not popularizing. Popularizing means creating connection with your audience. So you need to go beyond just giving facts. You really need to find and adapt the message and find what's relevant for each of the targets. Not thinking broad enough, that's the last one. This means put science everywhere you can, because science needs to be part of the conversation. So mode of action, hero movie, hero assets, not enough. Should be everywhere, and it can be done in a very smart way. So, let's flood the world with science. I really like that image. So on the last slide, we're going to give you some just, contacts you can go to if you want to connect with us, if you want to, book a meeting or a Q&A, we'll go through them. If you want to book a meeting, just feel free to reach out to any of the people that are here on the slide. If you need us to set up a specific session for you and your teams, this is also something we can totally do. I would be really happy to do so. So you can connect any of the guys on the slide, depending on where you're based, and we will be very happy to take your team through this deck. We have 2 minutes left, so I suggest we go through
The last question.
the last questions. So we had a question from Ludovic, who was asking, you're mentioning experiential assets. Could experiential assets be relevant to further engage audience? And how can brands leverage these formats? That's one question. And the second one is coming from, let me go back to Julia. Julia was asking, would you say that the 5 mistakes apply for both B2C and B2B businesses? You have 2 minutes.
1 minute for each question.
Yes.
Maybe starting with Julia's question, I think definitely, whether you're an ingredient manufacturers or even like a small startup of some sort, as long as you have science and you need to communicate science, the 5 mistakes can very well apply to you. It doesn't matter, I guess, how big you are or the nature of your business. I feel like science now is the best reason to buy for people. Again, whether it's kind of like B2C or B2C audiences. And so that's why trying to not repeat these and make sure you have a very clear scientific communication that is very understandable and memorable to everyone is definitely the key. So absolutely, you can always make sure to not do these and try to always improve in your processes to have more impact.
And for Ludovic's question, yes, of course, doing experiential assets could be so relevant to engage your audience. As Anne-Sophie said, you need to put your science everywhere, but in any kinds of formats are also. You can create so amazing, immersive experiences to create even more impact. And this is very useful, especially in congresses, and B2B congresses. So it's a great way also to be more memorable. So yes, it's so relevant, of course.
And we're just on time.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Thank you, guys. Thanks a lot for this discussion today. Thanks for sharing all your insights with us. Thanks to the audience for participating and for being there all along, because you've been very serious. Very happy about that. Thank you for your questions. And really feel free to reach out to us if you need more information or if you need a private session. We'd be very happy to do so. We love sharing our insights to everybody. And see you soon, hopefully, for the next masterclass.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you again, everyone, for joining.
Thank you, guys.
Bye-bye.